Good. Good afternoon, everybody, and a really warm welcome to the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Panel for Kirklees Council. This is on Monday, the 20th of March 2023, and we're starting at 2 p.m. Just a reminder to everybody who's participating this afternoon that the meetings are they're live streamed, but they're also recorded for archival purposes, just to be aware of that. So we're just going to do a quick round of introductions. So panel members will introduce ourselves right at the beginning. Officers will introduce themselves as and when we come to their items. Just to say this afternoon, we've just had apologies from Tony Bromley, who is a co-opted member. She wasn't well at the last meeting, but did attend. But she's recently had some more treatment, and our thoughts are with Tony, and we hope she gets well soon. So, round of introductions then, just so I can see them. Oliver, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Oliver Gibson, and I'm the Overview and Scrutiny Co-op team.
Thank you, James.
I'm Councillor James Homewood. I'm one of the members of the panel.
Elizabeth.
Councillor Elizabeth Reynolds, member of the panel and also a member of corporate parenting.
Thank you. Richard.
Hello, Richard Smith, Kirk Burton Ward Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, and I'm Andrew Marchington, Kirklees Councillor and Chair of the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Panel. Item 2 are the minutes of the meeting. Oh, sorry, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Paul White, Councillor for Home Valley North and panel member. Thank you.
That's me getting complacent. I thought we were getting really good at doing hybrid meetings, and Paul, who's with us at Huddersfield Town Hall, is sort of been penalised for that. I just will take this opportunity again, Paul. I think it's Paul's last meeting of the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Panel. You've been with us for, I think, 4 years now. We just thank you so much for the contributions you've made to our panel, your insights as a school governor, as the carer for an adult young person, a person with disability, special needs, and the thoughts and insights, your comments and questions over the last 4 years have been really appreciated. So just thank you for that, and we wish you well in Home Valley North, and in Meltham in particular, and yeah, hope all those things go on. So thank you very much. It's really appreciated. Thank you. We'll miss your contributions, Paul. We very well. Thank you. Okay. Item 2, the minutes of our previous meeting held on the 23rd of January 2023. Can we approve those as a correct record, that meeting? Yeah, that looks like that's okay. Yeah, thank you, Helen and Nicola, for those comprehensive minutes, as always. Item 3 are about interests. So has any panel member got an interest on to declare on any of the items on the agenda? No, that's fine, thank you. Item 4, all of our this meeting will be held in public. It's open. If there's anything that crops up where we feel we need to move into a private session, then I will ask one of the panel members to move the appropriate motion, and we will do that. And then we'll come back into public session as soon as possible. Item 5, deputations and petitions. All members of the public are welcome to do that if they wish to do so, but have we got any today? We haven't got any today. And also members of the public are welcome to come and ask questions if they want to do so. Have we got any questions this afternoon? No, we haven't. So that's item 5 and item 6. So we're onto item 7, which is the performance data children's services. We have had quite as in detail look at that in private session. Also, one of the things we do as scrutiny members is we observe some of the scrutiny that goes on out with this, and I was at the children's what's it called? Ambition Board. The Children's Ambition Board last Monday, And actually some of the questions that members of Scrutiny have asked over the last 18 months to 2 years, those have been picked up, and we've got people within Children and Young People Services and partners asking each other's questions about that, and quite a lot of scrutiny going on in that respect, and it was really good to see that happening. But there's a few highlights that we'd like people to present this afternoon, and so if Vicky, you want to come in and introduce, and I think there's some points we wanted to raise about the number of children looked after and some workforce stuff we might want to discuss. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Vicky Metheringham, Service Director for Child Protection and Family Support in Kirklees. Yeah, just wanted to just highlight the fact that in Kirklees, the number of looked after children that are in our care remains very stable, and has been stable over the last 12 months, which I think is just something we should be cited on. Certainly the national picture and the picture with regard to our staff neighbours tells quite a different story, and some other authorities are experiencing quite an influx of children entering care. In Kirklees, we've got really robust oversight of decision making from our heads of service, which ensure that children come into care in a usually planned and timely way. And just to raise at the same time that the numbers of children that leave care, similarly, we've sustained high numbers of children that leave care for a number of reasons, which include special guardianship orders or permanent arrangements with their family that means that children don't need to be looked after unnecessarily. So that's a good news story, really, in terms of those children. It means that we can look after those children well and make sure that they're wherever possible in stable placements. Just wanted to raise the increased numbers of social work vacancies that we're starting to see across the service, and really making sure that we've got a good oversight of social work caseloads is something that's beginning to worry us a little bit in terms of that rising caseloads. What we know when we analyse data with regard to social workers that are leaving, a number of them aren't leaving Kirklees, they're actually moving on into alternative posts within Kirklees Children's Services, such as within the Connected Persons team, as advanced practitioners. So we are retaining those workers, albeit they're moving on from social work frontline posts. And as we start to see some social work caseloads rising, we've Kirklees have applauded ourselves on not having used agency workers for a number of years. We are now beginning to have to grapple with, do we need to think about for a short period of time using agency workers in accordance with the memorandum of understanding that's been agreed across the Yorkshire and Humber region, making sure that if we do use agency workers that we absolutely make sure that they're good quality workers. We take references from previous employers, not from their agency, and we make sure that agency workers are only asked to work with children on a short-term basis, because it's really important to us that children have long-standing relationships with their allocated workers. But just wanted to raise that we are thinking that we might need, for a short period of time, for the next 6 months, we might have to think about using agency workers whilst we get through the next few months. We know that we'll start to see a rise in social workers coming into the local authority through the range of Step Up to Social Work programme, the ASYE scheme and the apprenticeship scheme. But we know that in 2021-22 we didn't recruit as many ASYEs, primarily because there was a change in the teaching partnership. So it's just something that we want to keep our eye on.
Yeah, thanks Vicky for that update. ASYE, do you want to just explain what an ASYE? Go on.
Yeah, so ASYE is a social worker that starts their career, and social workers, it's their assessed and supported year, so they receive additional support and mentoring from advanced practitioners. They have a reduced caseload, and we're committed to ASYEs having a reduced caseload so that they can have the opportunity to upskill themselves and be supported by others to gain those key social work skills. They then produce a portfolio of evidence at the end of that year, and before they then they move on into becoming a more experienced social worker.
I just wanted you to do that because we've had the privilege of actually meeting some of the people working in child protection social work when they're training and stuff, and we've sort of spoken to them about how positive they feel about working within Kirklees and the support that they get, and some of their mentors as well. So there does seem to be, as we've been going out and about meeting the child protection teams, you know, people enjoy working in Kirklees in this important area. And particularly those who've sort of done the training here, quite a few of them actually want to keep working in Kirklees once that's been completed. So thank you for that. So panel members, any questions or comments on that area of the report? No, that's fine, thank you. Tom, there was some discussion around child protection conferences.
Thank you, Councillor Marchington. Tom Brailsford, Service Director for Resources Improvement and Partnerships. Yeah, I think one of the things we highlighted in the private section is that initial child protection conferences, which need to be done within 15 days, we've seen a decrease around December and January in the percentage of those being done, but we've worked quite hard over the past couple of months looking at how we can work more collaboratively and make things easier across our systems and multi-agency systems to start to improve that again. So I think the current data at the moment is that's gone to 68%, which is really positive. We're seeing that rise, but that's still below our statistical neighbours and the national average. So we're keeping a really close eye on that. I'm working very collaboratively across the system to make sure that we can get that percentage up into the 80s and 90s. I think it's worth saying for members that obviously where children aren't seen at an initial child protection conference within those 15 days, the social work teams and other professionals involved are closely monitoring those children and young people through safety planning. And making sure that they're safe until the initial child protection conferences take place. And I also think it's worth pointing out in the past couple of months, we've had something called practice learning days, where we get professionals involved in certain areas together to look at issues and practice. And we've had a practice learning day looking at the impact of neglect on our children and young people through child protection conferences, and also the impact of domestic violence and how we can look at the relationships between multi-agency professionals and families involved in domestic violence. We've also done, I think it's 3 deep dives to date now, just to double check and make sure that our decision making and our step up and step down arrangements are what we'd want them to be, because our child protection figures are slightly lower than the number of children and people on child protection plan is slightly lower than regional and national average, and we continue to be assured that our decision making and step up, step down arrangements are what we'd want them to be, and that children are safe in those arrangements and decision making. So I think that's what I wanted to highlight, Councillor Marchington. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for that. Okay, thank you. And Joanne, there was some discussion about what seemed to be an interesting improvement in practice standards. If you'd like to share that with us, please. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Marchington. My name's Joanne Sanders. I'm Service Director for Learning and Early Support. We were able to look in a bit more detail at some of the work that not just the council's family support service do, but also our partners. In our service, we have early support consultants, and they work both in our front door alongside social care and multi-agency, but also out in local areas, giving support to schools and other partners to make sure that referrals come through to our early support multi-agency partnership in a timely way. So that does help and support the step up and step down that Tom referred to. We were able to share some a little bit more detail around average caseloads of the council's family support workers, and that at the moment is around 15 to 16 children per full-time equivalent worker, and about 13% of those are currently joint worked with our children's social care colleagues. what we were able to give some assurance about is our practice standards. So as it stands, assessments are completed at 62% within timescales, and that's a 14% increase over the last 12 months. But what we particularly wanted to draw attention to was the fact that practice standards, and they're down to us to set, 20 days to turn those assessments round, and that's a significant improvement from 2020, when 45 days was the practice standard, and at that time compliance was 32%. So in summary, we've halved the time for those assessments, but double the compliance rates. And that's really been down to a huge investment in our workforce. They've had the benefit of undertaking strengthening practice training programme. And so it's not just about compliance, but it's also about quality. And we shared some information as well about the age profile of the youngsters that we're working with. But yeah, really helpful to be able to give that oversight and a little bit more detail behind some of the family support statistics.
Yeah. Thank you, Jan, for that feedback. Thank you for all that feedback. And just to assure members of the public who are watching and ourselves, actually there's a lot of scrutiny going on all the time. There's information being looked at on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and then the other panels that are going on. So that's been, and again, some of the questions that we've asked over the last 18 months to 2 years have been picked up, and some of that will come through in the agenda. So thank you. Right, we're on to item 8, which is a report on exclusions and suspensions. I think, Joanne, you promised that was coming at this time, so thank you. And I think, Kelsey, you're going to be presenting that for us. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and just give us a brief introduction to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marchington. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Kelsey Clark-Davis. I'm Head of Education, Safeguarding and Inclusion in Kirklees. So a report's been provided, and hopefully you've had a chance to read and digest. I think you'll be able to see from the report the main headlines and trends that we can see is that we have seen a rise in both permanent exclusions and suspensions over recent years. Obviously, the years 19, 20 and 2021 were not normal years because of the COVID pandemic. So it's the trend is skewed, but we can see certainly since last year and what's coming through this year, we are seeing an increase. You can see some of those trends, not so much of a change, but it applies largely to boys. We know kind of the age group, it's usually in secondary school more than in primary school. We can see that the main reason for exclusions and suspension is around what we call persistent disruptive behaviour. It's not where we want it to be. We're working really hard. We've captured within our SEND transformation plan and also within the Our Kirklees Futures Learning Strategy an absolute ambition and commitment to reducing exclusions in Kirklees, wanting to work with our partners. I suppose it's not just reducing exclusions, it's about improving behaviour and improving provision so that there isn't a need to exclude going forward. So what the report also really tries to set out are all the things that are underway to try and address this issue. So huge work that's underway around working with our schools around developing a more trauma-informed approach, increased understanding of special educational needs and disabilities, so that perhaps when we're looking at behaviour, we can look at it through those lenses of considering previous trauma and also potential undiagnosed special educational needs and disabilities. So there's work around training, learning, upskilling, but wider than that, also a huge amount of work around developing our specialist placements across Kirklees, across both the alternative provision sector and the wider special educational needs and disabilities sector. So I guess to sort of summarise really, are we where we want to be around exclusions? No, we're not. We can see that up until 2017-ish, we were in line with national, but there's been an increase. We're broadly in line with our Yorkshire and Humber regional partners, but this is something that we absolutely are addressing and will continue to address. and very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kelsey, for that report. Panel members, questions or comments on the exclusions and suspensions? Paul, initially, and then I'll bring Elizabeth and James in after that in that order. Thank you.
Thanks very much for this report, Kelsey. For me, it's one of the most important reports that I've seen in the last 4 years from my background as a chair of governors in school. Because I think if we get this right, this will offer such a proper support for schools. And for me, it's one of the biggest issues, not just in high schools, but primary schools as well. Not just exclusions and suspensions, it's what's below that in the school setting. Because any pupil that's excluded or suspended, there's been an awful lot of work already in place in school to try and prevent that. So whilst the figures look high, we know that the amount of concern and disruption in schools surrounding those pupils is already very high. So I think, you know, the ambition that you've set out in here is fantastic, and it's where we should be going. That phrase, the right support in the right place at the right time, just chimes so much with me. It's so important to get all that right. And that's on page 10. I did have a slight question there on page 10, because it talks about our vision in Kirklees to have 0 exclusions. And whilst I think that is a fantastic ambition, I'm not sure it's realistic, and therefore should we be setting something that's unrealistic. And the reason why I say it's not realistic is that if we look at the 2 paragraphs above from the Timpson review, it says exclusions, both fixed period and permanent, is a necessary sanction. So if it's a necessary sanction, it's going to happen. We don't want it to happen very often, but it is going to happen. And as well as a necessary tool, i.e. a necessary tool to keep others safe, which it is, so there are times when, in order to keep people safe, we are going to have to use exclusions and suspensions. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where we have 0 exclusions and suspensions in Kirklees. So I just think the wording of that seems to be, it's great to have that ambition, but are we just setting ourselves up to fail? So I'll just leave that as one question. You might want to comment on as to why we've got that as an ambition. There were 2 or 3 other things. If you want, yeah.
Shall I respond to that one first? So I think it's a really good point and a really good debate, and thank you for raising that. And we have had this debate and conversation internally as well as in this forum about this ambition of 0 exclusions and whether that is ever really achievable, and is it right to set ourselves an ambition that might not be achievable. And we've talked about actually having that aspiration, aspiration of 0 exclusions, whilst we appreciate and accept that we live in a lawful society where there has got to be a bottom line, where there may well be need to use that sanction. We absolutely want to have that ambition and aim to not have to, because there is going to be enough support at the right place at the right time to prevent us needing to do that. But I think it's a dialogue worth continuing having in. It is something that is quoted within the learning strategy within our Kirklees Futures. Whether that's something that we want to amend the wording slightly to represent that or not. That said, you know, that aspiration, that ambition is what we're aiming for. I can see yours just popped a hand up there. I don't know if you want to add to that, Joe.
Yeah, that's okay, Chair. I think I got, you know, everything that you've said, Kelsey. I think it was a huge debate as we were co-producing our Kirklees Futures, and I think when you look at some of the impact of being excluded, how could we have an ambition not to want 0 permanent exclusions? And one of the challenges that you're right in terms of debate. If you look at some of the data, our children that are looked after, we've had 0 permanent exclusions for a number of years. And I think it's in Kelsey's report as well. Our special schools have excluded no children. So that we've got to keep having the conversation about what would it take. So it is an ambition, it's an aspiration. And I think that's a little bit different by saying it will not be tolerated per se. We want to get the right support for those youngsters. The devastating impact of being excluded for future life chances is, so I think we purposefully set that high aspiration, but you're right, it's not without challenge.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I appreciate both those answers. And I sort of do understand. I just wonder, you know, whether there might be a slight tweak in the wording there. Just on page 7, questions. I've got just a few questions on the report. I think on page 7, at the top says secondary phase, and unless I'm misreading this, it says a third were male, and I think it should say 2/3 were male. Just looking at Kelsey.
I'm jumping around. I've got a different device, so I can't see the page numbers, so forgive me. Can I take that away and come back to you on that one?
Yeah, it just says on the secondary phase, and it's page 7 of the report, but page 15 of the actual pack. It talks about the suspensions, and it says a third of the suspensions were male, but of course the figures show 2/3. So I think it's just a typographical error, but just so not to confuse. And then on page 8, you've got the stats for academy schools and local authority maintained schools. And again, I was trying to interpret what I'm seeing there, but it seems to suggest that there are 3 times more suspensions in academy schools and local authority maintained schools on those percentages there. I'm just wondering whether I'm reading that correctly or...
It's always helpful to have numbers as those percentages, isn't it? And I'm going to go away and ensure that we get the absolute numbers that fit with those. But the percentages we're taking is a percentage of the overall academy cohort of young people, and then the overall cohort of children in maintained schools. So of all of if we add all the academies together in Kirklees, I don't know, say that's like 20,000 pupils, that's probably too many. But then 4% of those experience 4.8% of those experience suspension in that spring term. That's what that data is telling us there. In comparison to if we added all of our maintained schools together, 1 point, sorry, it's really small on my device there, 1 point something percent of the maintained schools experience suspension. So you are right, in terms of an overall cohort, an overall population cohort, it is significantly higher in our academies than it is in our maintained schools.
Yeah. I just wonder, my question would be if you could give us any insight as to why that is and what's being done to tackle academy schools if it's as bad as that, because it clearly seems to be that the issue is significantly worse in academy schools than it is in local authority maintained schools, which seems to me to be shocking. That would be my interpretation of that. I've just got one other question, and really there's a slight comment on it, but I just wonder what the progress is in the additionally resource provision. In other words, the right settings, the right place, as you've got in your strapline there. If anybody could just give us an update, just some flavour of where you're up to in terms of these additional places. And that's it from me for the moment. Thank you.
So, yeah, I could do that quite quickly, and then we'll come back to the previous question, and perhaps we can provide a bit more detail around the update around sufficiency in future if needed. But with regards to the additional resource provisions, we are aiming for 5 new additional resource provisions to be open for September 23. So we're currently in March. We're at the point of one of them started recruiting, a number of the others have got adverts out at the moment. We've got some refurbishment work going on in some of the settings, so it's full speed ahead with all hands to deck. But the aspiration and aim, and we are still on track for September 23. So that's 2 new primary SEMH provisions, 1 primary cognition and learning resource provision, 1 primary communication and interaction provision, and 1 secondary communication and interaction provision for September. With regards to the question about how are we putting challenge into our academies, Jo, I know your hand popped up there. Did you want to come in?
Thank you. Just in terms of, I mean, I think it's really helpful clarification, Kelsey. Thank you about the numbers. I think it is worth us bringing back a little bit more of a deep dive, but rather than it just being, and I know that's not what we're saying, but the proportion of our schools that are primary and academies versus the proportion of our children that are educated in secondary academies is different. That's why I think helpfully the statistics have been presented as they have done, and you have seen from the other statistics in the report that it's primarily secondary age youngsters that are being excluded. So it's not necessarily a thing that it's academy, but it's perhaps to do with the proportions of secondary schools that have an academy status. Absolutely right. We do need to do a deep dive, and actually we are doing that to inform some of our strategies as well. How do we support outreach appropriately, and how do we support the needs of our youngsters? And some of that is also about context of the school itself. Not all our schools are good or outstanding. So we're absolutely about supporting our youngsters to thrive in mainstream. So I think it warrants a little bit more of a deep dive, but I think proportionately more of the academy schools are secondary, which may explain some of the differences. Thank you.
And the other thing probably worth adding as well is obviously every school has their own individual behaviour policy that they work to. Some are across academy trusts. There's a section in the report about our work with schools around coming from a trauma-informed approach. So there are some schools that have been working with us around developing relational policies to sit alongside their behaviour policies, but this is inconsistent. It is worth highlighting that there are a large number of our secondary schools, both academies and maintained schools, that have had zero exclusions. Obviously, the report doesn't go into detail about which individual schools, but yeah, it's probably fair to say that.
Right, thank you. Yeah, just on the page 8 stuff, yeah, but you could have some scales on, yeah, the numbers or something, because it does need a bit more interpretation on the data on that. Fine, okay, thank you. What I'm going to do, I've got several panel members who want to ask questions, so I'm going to go through, because I'm going to take a question at a time and go through, and if we've got similar questions on similar areas, so I've got Elizabeth, then James, then Richard, but if we can if we've got one question or comment, and then I'll rotate it through, and then I'll come back if we've got other people going to do, and then we're not just sat waiting for too long. So Elizabeth, have you got a question or a comment at this stage?
Yeah, it is just it's a kind of general one, really, looking at how we monitor the progress, particularly looking at the well, I'm really looking forward to the update. I think over time on our culture change towards trauma informed, because I think that's really at the heart of the ambition to reduce our exclusions. What I'm interested in is seeing how that monitoring's done, how the monitoring is done of what we've already done and the impact that we've already had, because there has been considerable already, but also our progress going forward. And I'm fascinated to think how we, and I know I've had conversations with Johannes Handers about this before, but how do we measure that change? And it's not just the number of exclusions that we're looking at, but actually long term, it's going to be reflected in attainment. Attainment will, she said very confidently, go up as exclusions reduce, and as the whole trauma-informed ethos goes forward into schools. So it's more about the atmosphere and the culture, and I would really like some feedback on that and how we're going to monitor it over time. So just a note for next set of meetings, really. How are we doing? How have we decided to measure it, and what have we got to do next? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's really important, absolutely. And I think the other bit that I didn't sort of say at the beginning, it's important to consider that we are just coming out of a global pandemic, and all of the impact of that we're still feeling. So it's not a normal time still, is it? And everything else that's going on in the world right now in terms of some of the pressures. I echo what our colleague just said about none of our schools. I don't think any of our schools want to exclude children. Our schools are working their socks off. It's tough times right now for many different reasons.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Just before I move on to James, I think there's a correction to the report as well. On page 3 of the report, page 11 of our pack, the table there has not got the correct information. This is a draft stage, so you can just draw a line through that. But the correct figures are on page 5 of the report. What does our data tell us? That all the correct figures are there, and that's page 13 of the published pack. So we're sorry about that. Okay. James, have you got comments or questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Just a few things. Just on, I guess, just on looking at the details on suspensions and expulsions, I was just unsure. So we've got the kind of ethnicity breakdown that goes on there, but then I can't really see anywhere else that's made any reference to that in terms of what we think that means. Because I'm just looking at particularly on the suspensions, there obviously seems to be a particular issue around mixed and dual backgrounds, and there's no reference to that anywhere else or suggestion that that's one of the vulnerability factors. And I don't know whether that's because what we think that relates to. The second one was just, there's also reference to living in particular wards being a factor, and I know on the expulsions it says it relates to a particular school, but then on the suspensions it doesn't, and I don't know whether it means, you know, where you live or schools in particular localities, because obviously you may not live in the ward that you go to school in, or vice versa. So I'm not sure whether that means it's where you live, i.e. a geographical issue, or it's the schools in particular schools in particular areas. And then the third one I just want to ask is one of the vulnerability factors, it refers to high risk of criminality. And again, I just wanted to check what we meant by that, because obviously I'm quite concerned around, you know, criminal grooming and that type of thing that we see in some areas, and I don't know if that's what we mean by that. And I'm just, because I'm quite conscious of the fact around criminality, and we've got young people who are actually being groomed effectively in criminality, and there's obviously a certain point at what point is somebody being groomed, and what is at some point actually criminal themselves. And I think it would just, I don't know if that's what we're referring to there in terms of that kind of criminal exploitation issue that is obviously a problem in certain areas. Thanks, Jay. Those are just the questions I had.
Okay, so in response, with regards to the ward question to start with, we're referring to the school in which the young people attend with this data. So what we're doing, we've interpreted the schools are in clusters of wards. So when we've sort of talked about particular wards where exclusions are higher, that's referring to the schools within that area. I think you're right with regards to the analysis around ethnicity. Yes, we've highlighted and we've pointed out the particular groups where there's been higher exclusions or suspensions. But I don't think we have really kind of gone, so that's probably a recommendation for a next step. And so what does that mean, and what might we do to address that? With regards to the risk of criminality, it's national sort of research and evidence shows us, we know that there's correlation between young people that are excluded and young people that then become involved in the criminal justice system. And again, that's what the report is referring to. We also, obviously, we monitor and track at a pupil level, and we work closely with our youth justice service and youth engagement service. So are able to, obviously this report wouldn't go into any pupil level data, but are able to make that correlation as well. So that's through our analysis and work. We know that what's happening in Kirklees is mirroring what the national research says around, not all, but a number of young people who experience exclusion from school can go on to then be involved, you're right, in exploitation and criminal exploitation.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that, James, or you? No. Fine. Is that all right? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think, thanks, Kelsey, for that response. And thanks for your question, James, and your response, Kelsey. I think, again, looking at the data, this is on page 6. Thank you. We have got numbers there. against each of those around ethnicity. What it does show us is, I mean, it's looking at the proportion of people from different, young people from ethnic groups, but actually it's relatively small numbers. So actually the number of children of black or black British heritage is very small. You know, it's a very small number compared to the white British. And we just need to, the contextualisation of that as well. So there is something to be looked at, but we just need, just be careful with how that's presented as well. Okay. Richard, you want to come in on that stage?
Thank you. Hi. I've got a couple of questions, or one question, a couple of comments. Really, it's a different slant on something that's been discussed already. How confident, regarding exclusions, how confident are you that the same standard is being applied across the board? I know we've talked about academy and grant maintained schools. You know, is it that there is a totally different view of acceptable behaviour? I don't know the answer to that question. And the point about zero exclusions, I think I agree with Paul in a sense that it's a necessary sanction, and it's there to keep people safe. I think I have a lot of sympathy with, especially when you talk about looked after children, for all the obvious reasons. But I think we need to recognise that when we're talking about a policy of zero exclusions, we need to be careful that there are some behaviours that disrupt the education of other children so severely that there is no other option. And I think I've mentioned this before, and I'm not in favour of excluding people if we can possibly avoid that, but I think we need to keep that in mind as well. One final point, if I may, and it's not a question, it's just a point. I think it's an interesting question that's just been raised by James about grooming versus the criminal, and I suppose it's about what point do we treat people as a victim or a perpetrator, isn't it? At what point does that person stop becoming a victim of grooming and start becoming either a groomer themselves or the perpetrator, i.e. a criminal? And I don't know what the answer to that is either, but it is an interesting question.
I think my response would be whether they're a victim or a perpetrator. If they're a child, we want to work with them and want to support. I think going back to your first question, and Joe, please do come and add to it, but it's very difficult as a local authority with almost 200 schools across. Each school, obviously some schools are part of a multi-academy trust, some schools are local authority maintained schools, but schools have their own behaviour policies and schools operate in their own way. So with regards to us having an overall picture of a standardised approach of what is acceptable behaviour and what's not, that's very difficult. I don't know if subjective is too much of a strong word, but schools have their own individual behaviour policies. So I'll use an example. In one school, for example, if a pupil vapes, is caught with a vape in that school, that is an automatic suspension. In another school, they wouldn't automatically suspend them for bringing a vape into school. There be a sanction, but that would be something dealt with internally within the school. George, you want to add to that?
Just that I'd add that actually our schools are really embracing the ambitions of our Kirklees futures, so much so, for example, that our secondary school head teachers have their own forum. They've used the themes of inclusion, resilience and equity, and what they're trying their very best to do is share some great practice. I think, like you said, Kelsey, I don't see our head teachers going, yay, let me exclude. The absolute opposite. I think your observations, Councillor White, about everything that goes before that is true. They are trying their absolute best to share those great practices. But it isn't a one size fits all. Life isn't like that, is it? We deal with young people, but it's a good example that Kelsey's raised. I think it's very much about how do we find the alternatives then? If there is something additional that a youngster needs, how do we find the alternative that supports schools to be able to find that alternative rather than excluding? And in particular I talk about permanent exclusion, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you, Richard, for your questions and for the responses. I'm just going to chip on as well, because again, we're looking at the permanent exclusions, so it's 68 in the time frame we're looking at, which compared to the number of children we've got in school across all the phases is very, very, very small. And I'm sure it's used as a last resort sanction, but we still listen to questions about that. Our experience, again, when we've talked to children and young people about how they feel about things that happen in the community, and there's sometimes this impression that children, particularly when it's antisocial behaviour, there's some negative attitudes towards children and young people. We know that's not the case, but also children and young people express those concerns as well. And, if a child or young person is experiencing inappropriate, particularly violent behaviour from one of their peers, you would hope that whatever's happening, the school is protecting those children as well as possible, and at some stage that would, that the sanction is permanent exclusion. And I think part of the parcel about working towards zero is actually to make sure that the environment in schools is safe for all of our children and young people, and doing what you can do, even when that's dealing with the most extreme behaviours. And I think we would all aspire to that. And again, if a child is permanently excluded, they're either not in, they're not in school at all, or they're going somewhere else. And if you don't deal with what the root causes are, then you're just passing the problem on to another group of children and young people who are doing that. So I think it's a good question to ask. We are looking for long-term solutions as we go, and as we move towards zero, it is about behaviours that work for all of our young people, including those who find it difficult sometimes to cope with what life throws at them and what school throws at them as well. Elizabeth, bring you back in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit really to what Richard had said, and in the way that I see it, and the way that I think Kirklees Futures is moving, is it isn't just about the exclusions, and it is about a culture change for prevention. It's not about the acceptance of bad behaviour and unacceptable behaviour, but it's about early action to prevent that escalation in the first place. So if you understand where that behaviour is coming from, as an individual and as a group of people, then you can put some reasonable steps in on both sides. The reasonable steps to improve the resilience of the child. So if they don't have a good support system around them, to try and build that support system, but also to be I don't want to say not too harsh at school, but just understanding from a point of view of a school point of view. I've worked in schools for an awful long time, and some teachers and some schools are very, no, this is it, this is the line, or whoever you are, whatever you are. But in fact, if you approach that differently with the individual child, you can often stop that escalation just by knowing a little bit more about the child. And prevent it going any further. So it's not saying this bad behaviour isn't acceptable. It's about stopping it before it gets there. And I think that's on both sides, child and school. That's my understanding of it, if that helps as well.
It makes sense.
Thank you.
Fine. Right, thank you. Any other comments and questions from panel members before we move on? No. Yeah, well, thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Joanne, for the report. Thank you for what you said about, and thank you for the things you're going to come back to us with as well. And again, we thank the work that goes on with it, the positive work that goes on with within our school systems to make sure that children and young people are, kept in safe environments, and that it's good for all, and the staff as well. So thank you. Right. Okay, we're going to move on to now item 9, which I love the title of this next report, Stable Homes Built on Love. That's excellent. So I think, Vicky, you're going to be presenting that for us.
Yeah. So I think this is just going to provide you with an update in terms of the government's response to 3 reviews. So just to give you a little bit of detail about that, the Department for Education issued a response in February 2023 in response to the independent review of children's social care. to the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel's inquiry into the murders of 2 children, and the Competition and Markets Authority study of the children's social care market, and published 3 consultation documents, one entitled Stable Homes Built on Love, and the 2 others was around a report proposing reforms to agency social work and a proposed national framework. And these consultations close in May 2023, and much of that feedback will then inform future planning within children's services. And so I suspect it will be helpful for us to come back later on in the year with regard to what those consultations have said and how that's going to inform the future direction. So quite a detailed report that just sets out the various strands to what's being currently explored, and I'll go through them individually, although I'm sure you've read the report. So the DfE has committed 200 million in funding over the next 2 years, which is below what was recommended by the care review. And although it's welcomed, it's acknowledged that additional monies would have enabled much more ability to embrace the changes that were recommended. The social work training and development has now will be established, and that will replace the ASYE assessed year in practice title, and will support practitioners to develop and be assessed against the skills and knowledge that they need. And that's going to be tested by a group of early adopter councils with a view to full implementation in 2026. The DfE are looking at exploring ways to support the recruitment of up to 500 additional child and family social work apprentices. And actually, we've all been contacted individually just over the last couple of weeks with regard to apprentices, and if they were to invest some money to local authorities, how many apprentices would we want to consider taking? And that money's been given to local authorities for the first 2 years to help tackle staff shortages, the expectation being that local authorities match fund for the 3rd year. And although, again, it's welcomed, it's not clear how that's going to address the massive issue that faces every single local authority in the country with regard to recruitment. Really helpfully, the DfE's proposed bringing in national rules to reduce the cost and use of agency social workers. And I talked earlier on actually about having a memorandum of understanding in place. This really confirms that approach, if you like, and the idea being that agency rates will be capped. So, you know, sometimes you see agency workers in local authority areas going between local authority to local authority, which obviously impacts on the relationships they have with children. This will stop that. The proposal is that agency workers will be expected to have undertaken quite significant social work training before they're able to go on and become an agency social worker. And there's further consultation taking place. The ADCS saying very strongly this isn't soon enough. The changes to agency workers needs to happen as soon as possible because of the high levels of vacancies. The DfE rejected the care review recommendation for the national pay scale for social workers on the grounds that this risks destabilising the local government pay system. However, it has said that it wants greater transparency in what councils pay social workers and wants to better understand the existing inequalities. And in the Yorkshire and Humber region, work's been undertaken to understand the difference between pay scales and job roles. The DfE rejected the care review proposal for registered social workers and managers to spend 100 hours in direct work. And that's a positive move because it would obviously impact even more on social work retention and recruitment difficulties. The DfE have confirmed that the £200 million, they're going to identify 45 million to be allocated for up to 12 local authority Families First for Children pathfinders to trial the care review proposal. This is the one that really will impact most significantly on mine and Joe's part of the world, because the proposal is around introducing multidisciplinary family help services to provide joined up support for families, and will bring together existing kind of early help support and child in need services. And as part of this, the DfE will consult on removing the requirement for social workers to lead on what's currently child in need cases. This will relieve quite significant pressure if the child in need requirement disappears, because that will mean we'll have much more capacity without needing a social worker to work with a number of our families. But that will require a change in legislation, and we don't know how soon that change in legislation would take place. Alongside that proposal, the suggestion is that there'll be child protection lead practitioners who will have received advanced specialist training, and they'll be appointed to lead safeguarding cases in the pathfinder areas as called for by the care review. Those practitioners will co-work such cases with family help teams. The DfE rejected the care leavers' proposal to abolish the independent reviewing officer role, but have proposed to review and strengthen it. And the strategy referenced the care review's separate proposal to abolish the child protection. Did not reference the care review's separate proposal to abolish the child protection conference chair role. So we suspect that that will be considered in the review of working together, but not expecting an immediate change to that, if I'm honest with you. The 12 Pathfinder areas, and we don't know who the 12 Pathfinder areas are going to be at the moment, but they'll also test using family group decision making, family group conferences, which Kirklees already use, and is a well embedded part of practice here. However, as a learning organisation, we obviously want to take a keen interest in what the findings of the Pathfinder areas lead on, with a view to enhancing good practice. The kinship care strategy will be published later this year, and the idea being it wants to significant funding, well, not significant, 9 million funding to be spent on improving training and support for kinship carers. That is a positive move, because many of our children do live with kinship carers now, many more than used to do by far. Particularly in Kirklees, a number of children live with kinship carers. So if we can strengthen the training available to them, that will mean that they'll be better placed to meet the long-term needs of children, and will reduce costs for external and expensive external provision. In terms of foster care, of the 200 million set aside for this work, it's been agreed that 27 million will be spent on a carer recruitment and retention programme over the next 2 years, with a focus on keeping children, siblings together, on teenagers, options for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, mother and baby units, etc. And the care review called for the recruitment of 9,000 carers over 3 years. And in addition, foster carers will receive an above inflation rise in minimum allowances to deal with rising costs. And this proposal really aligns with the work that's currently being undertaken in Kirklees in respect of our whole sufficiency strategy. The DfE backed the care review's proposal to transfer responsibilities for the commissioning of care placements from individual councils to regional groupings of authority. And those regional care cooperatives will initially be tested in 2 Pathfinder areas before being rolled out. It's hoped that these measures will address the insufficiency of placements for children in care, improve outcomes, and tackle the excess profit making that we see by some children's home providers. Again, it's unclear about the timing of these findings, and in the meantime, we'll continue to work on our sufficiency strategy. The national body will also introduce a financial oversight regime for the largest children home providers, IFAs, which is welcomed by all authorities, as this has been one of the biggest sufficiency challenges over the last few years. The DfE have made a commitment of 30 million to be spent on family finding, befriending and mentoring programmes for looked after children and care leavers to help them find and maintain relationships, as the care review recommended. And the suggested grant made available for care leavers will increase from 2,000 to 3,000, while the bursary for those undertaking apprenticeships will rise from 1,000 to 3,000. You'll be aware that there was a rejection of the proposal, which was for local authorities to consider a blanket approach to council tax exemption. That wasn't supported by the DfE, which was a shame, because I think there was some hope that that might be. And also they rejected the care reviews call for care experience to become a protected characteristic under equality law. Again, a shame, because that would have required public bodies to tackle inequalities facing those with care experience. So a shame really for our care leavers, but there's lots of things that we can still do to support care leavers in employment, education and training. The DfE consulted on a children's social care national framework. as proposed by the review, which sets outcomes for children and families that should be achieved by all local authorities. The proposed outcome would be for children and families to stay together and get the support they need, for children to be supported by the family networks and to be safe in and out of home, and to have stable and loving homes, which is really the title of the document. So it's very much placed an emphasis on working with children, young people and their families, which is really in line with the way that we work in Kirklees in terms of the restorative approach. If we were to take the required changes forward, effectively engaging partners at an early stage will be key to this, and we've already started having conversations about that. And the whole emphasis of the National Care Review is around and from the DfE is around improving outcomes for children, maximising resources across the partnerships, in developing those multi-agency teams, and really we await the recommendations of the consultations to see what our next steps and timescales will be. We expect that to close in May 2023, and so I hope that's provided a bit of an update in terms of such a huge area really that's been long awaited, and it seems to have taken quite some time to have got to this stage.
Thank you, Vicky, for that update. Panel members, questions, comments? Elizabeth?
That is huge, isn't it? That's absolutely huge. I only want to pick out two little bits. The one about the kinship care strategy, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that, I think. I think kinship care is definitely the way forward, but also more complicated as well. And I think the training is really, that's quite encouraging as well. And the other one is the protected characteristic. A little bit disappointed because the fact that a child has been in care, it goes with them their entire life. It's not something that you know, as soon as they become an adult, it doesn't matter anymore. And I think a trick was missed there somehow or another, I think. But yeah, a really comprehensive report. Thank you very much.
I have to say my colleague completed it on my behalf, Elaine McShane. I can't take any credit for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Vicky. I've got a couple of questions, really. You brought up about apprenticeships as regard to, if I've understood it correctly, as regards people working within child protection and such. Is it possible to use some of our apprenticeship levy to complement any other sources of funding, particularly regarding degree level apprenticeships, if that's appropriate?
So Rob Fordyce, our principal social workers, leading on the whole kind of area around apprenticeships, both regionally and within the local authority, and through some of the workforce development work that he's leading on. So I'm sure that we can have a conversation with Rob about that.
It's just broadening the scope of what we think an apprenticeship is, isn't it? And it's, yeah, there looks to be potential opportunities there. The other comment really is it's on page 2 of the report, and it's about the funding. So the care review, you know, the recommendation of 2.6 billion over 5 years, as opposed to the 200 million over 2 years, which has actually been offered by DfE. My calculations might be correct, but that would give Kirklees an extra £3 million a year over 3 years. So I was just concerned a bit where big numbers are battered around and they don't always relate to the need. So yeah, I think scrutiny needs to be taking a bit more of a care. Yeah, well, we're going to throw 100 million, 200 million at this, or we're going to throw $1 billion at this, and the question is about, is that enough? And we get a review that's suggesting one amount, and the other amount, a much lower amount comes in, then we all need to be questioning about that. So I don't need a response to that, Vicky, necessarily, but I just think, you know, big numbers don't always do the job. So, thank you. Panel members, any other comments, questions? Right, thank you very much, Vicky, for that, and the work. Thank you. You passed that to all the other people who are working in this area as well. That's yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Right, what time are we on? 5 past. Can we just take a 5-minute break at this stage? Can we pause the live stream if that's possible? If people want to go and get a brew, and just collect your thought. I think we've been, it's an hour and 5 minutes. We've been on this meeting now. So just 5-minute break, and then we'll come back as fresh as we can be to the report on emotional wellbeing and mental health provision. I'm looking forward to Stuart presenting that. So 5 minutes. Thank you. Just a short pause there on the live stream, just so we can be fresh for the next report. So our next report is item 10, educational wellbeing and mental health provision for children and young people in Kirklees. Just invite Stuart to give us a brief introduction to that report. So thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Councillor Martington. So my name is Stuart Horn. I'm the Head of Children's Commissioning, and I work in a joint post between the NHS Integrated Care Board and Kirklees Council. So I've been asked to come along and present a report today about the provision that's commissioned in Kirklees by both the ICB and the Council to support children with their emotional wellbeing and mental health. So I've prepared a report which has been circulated with the papers, which contains descriptions of the types of services that we provide, a description of what it is that they do, and some of the challenges and issues that that we're presented with at the moment. In common with most areas across the country, we are experiencing increasing demand for children's emotional wellbeing and mental health services. But there are some areas of good practice that we're very proud of in Kirklees. So I just want to draw your attention to a couple of those from the report. Our service performs very strongly in terms of crisis and eating disorder provision. There are 4-hour response targets for crisis, and we're very close to 100% in achieving those targets for the most vulnerable young people. We've remodelled our placement support service, which is our support for children in care and children in the youth justice service. We've redesigned that service to work more closely with the children's social service team and increased capacity there. We have an intensive support team to provide support for young children with autism, which is identified as an area of good practice regionally. And it provides support to a relatively small number of families, but the feedback is that it's very important to their well-being. We have invested quite a lot in our online offer and app-based solutions for children and young people in recent years. We've got an online counselling service called Cooth, an online therapy service called Silver Cloud, and an out-of-hours telephone line called Night Owls, which gives an alternative way of accessing service, which can be accessed much more quickly, and children and young people often prefer that. So in terms of challenges that we're aware of in the service, we have particular issues across mental health provision, and this is not unique to Kirklees in recruitment and retention of skilled workforce. It's a challenge across the country, and we're no exception to that. We do have challenges in our children's emotional wellbeing service in terms of the wait times and access to that service, which we are working on improving. We're going to remodel that service to an area-based provision, which is based on learning that we've had from our mental health in schools teams and our area-based pilots, which have been commissioned by local elected members over the last couple of years. We also have very high demand for our neurodevelopmental assessment service, which is chiefly for autism and ADHD. So we despite increasing capacity and additional funding, the numbers just keep on increasing for young people referred into that service. And finally, I just want to mention the when children are acutely unwell with their mental health and may need a hospital admission, it's also known as Tier 4 provision. That's commissioned regionally, so not by us here in Kirklees, so we have limited control over it, but we're aware of shortfalls and difficulties in provision there when children need that hospital admission from time to time. So if I'm happy to take any questions anyone might have on the report.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart, for that introduction. Panel members, questions, comments about the report that we have in front of us? Yeah, Elizabeth.
Two quick ones, please. I got a little bit tied up with the waiting times. I know that they're quite different for CHOOS and for CAMS, and would like either next time round or outside the meeting some clarification of are waiting times going up, going down, and where are they going up and down? Because I think there is a little bit of lack of joined up. I think it's around page 36 in the pack. And the other one was really pleased to hear that with the emotional well-being provision being reviewed, that looking at all kinds of different models, and an open invitation really that when the officers actually do some of that work, they're more than welcome to come and talk to councillors and our constituents really, and the officers that worked with us when we set up some of the pilot projects that we did. So it's an invitation to that as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we'll certainly take you up on that offer. And just wanted to say that it's also really important that we will make sure that we involve children and young people themselves, to make sure that their voice is heard when redesigning the service. In terms of the waiting times, some of the services, especially where the numbers of young people involved are relatively small, the referrals can be quite spiky. We can have busy periods and less busy periods, which can make it a little bit more difficult to follow. But I will come back with further information and more information on the trends for you, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. I think that would be really, really appreciated. Yeah, just a bit of feedback. Elizabeth and I and a couple of others visited the mental health support team, is that right? We actually got to participate, I personally got to participate in a session that was being delivered in one of our local primary schools, and it was just great. So we did hear children and young people's voice in a real way, and I got the chance to put myself in the position, trying to remember what it was like to be in year 6. It wasn't called that my last year at junior school all those years again. And it's interesting to hear about some of the potential anxieties that our children and young people have about that, particularly that transition from primary school to secondary school. And I think some of us were a bit nervous about going to the big school as well. And for us, living in the Cowan Valley, it was a very big school. About a couple of thousand of us there when I started a long while ago. So I think we appreciated that. What we did witness there was actually some really good partnership working there between the council, between NHS, between I think Schwimmt, wasn't it? Is that, yeah, Swift, get the right acronym, and also Northrop Hall with some voluntary community sector involvement in there, and there's some really good partnership working to see how that was working as well. I think, again, building on what Elizabeth has said about some of the data we've picked up over the years about particularly children and young people in secondary, and about the pressures they experience in school. Again, you get academic pressures. We want all our children to do as well as possible. Whatever measure of how happy our children are, I think we ought to be doing that. That ought to be a number one priority for us as parents, corporate parents, and for those scrutinising it. So actually we do need some good longitudinal work about it, and some particular stresses and strains. I think one of the things we picked up again at the Children's Partnership Board that had always sent, again, some of the stuff that goes on in year 9 about self-assessment of how young people feel and well-being, particularly how well boys are equipped to articulate how they're feeling. And so we're looking forward to some of that work, perhaps modifying some of the questions so that they can express in their own voice how they're feeling about stuff, and then we can support them and do those around it. So yeah, and we do see some positive response in terms of response times up and down and some of the good work that's going on. But we know this is a generational thing, and there's still a way to go, isn't there, for our well-being amongst young people. And hopefully it's again building those blocks, isn't it, for being mental well-being among adults as well. If we set those building blocks early on, then we all benefit from that, don't we? So yeah, thank you. So I don't know if you want to respond. I know you, yeah.
No, thank you. I think they're all valid points, and we are continually refreshing the way that we gather information from children and young people to make sure that we're keeping up to date with the changing environment, but also learning from what we do. And I think asking different questions is often the thing that we need to keep in mind too. So yeah, we'll certainly keep that in mind. Thank you.
So any other comments or questions from panel members Oh, sorry, Paul. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up something on the mental health support team section that I think, Elizabeth, you touched on this. But the two additional projects that have been running in Huddersfield Rural and the Colne Valley area, I'm on the monitoring panel for the Huddersfield Rural one, so I know how well that's been going, and it has been a fantastic support to schools. There's been some issues around recruiting the right sorts of people, but that echoes across nearly everything we've looked at today. But I just want some reassurance that not only is that going to be picked up, and there is a comment here, but there's going to be a continued service when these two come to an end that is going to be as effective as the two that have actually been running. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there were two quite different schemes. One based more on helping the pupils directly, and one more aiming the support at the staff. So it's interesting to learn from both of those approaches. Yeah, I actually met with Councillor Greaves last week or the week before, I think it was, to discuss how we're going to overlap and continue these programmes. I think particularly for the Huddersfield Rural one, you were able to extend the funding a little bit to bridge the gap between where that support was supposed to end, and we were hoping to have the new service on stream. So yes, we are looking at how we get continuation of both different types of support across the places that have not had the MHST before.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Stuart, and thank you for panel members for your questions and your comments. There's nothing else. We'll move on to item 11, which is items for pre-decision scrutiny. So that's to Tom, Joanne, Tom and Vicky. Is anything coming up on the Cabinet agenda that you want us to be looking at before it gets there? Joanne?
I don't think there'll be anything in April, to the best of my knowledge, from learning and early support, but absolutely, it's probably, I think we're looking to bring some reports, but that will be much later now in the year, so around June time. It does affect some of the things that we've discussed. I mean, there's been some announcements made by national government in the budget, for example, around early years and the access to extended childcare. All of those things, I think we would really appreciate being able to engage with scrutiny upon prior to any reports to Cabinet, but nothing in April. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. Tom?
No, Councillor Marchington, not from the perspective of service in terms of resources, improvement and partnerships. There will potentially be something, again, over the summer period where we're looking as we implement our sufficiency strategy and we look at different potential settings around what we call satellite children's homes. There's some new legislation that means what you can do is attach a 2-bedded children's homes to an existing 4-bedded children's homes, and we're exploring some of those options, but there's nothing concrete yet. But there probably will be something coming later on in the summer.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's great. Vicky?
No, I don't think so, no. It's still very early days in my career with Kirklees. I may say no, I might find that there is something, but not that I'm immediately aware of.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I just think there's sometimes a bit of a nervousness about sharing stuff early with Scrutiny panel, but I think particularly the relationship between the Children and Young People's panel and our Cabinet members and our officers, we've sort of, you know, I think we're getting used to that, and we're trying to do that with the other scrutiny panels as well, on the understanding that the information we're given at an early stage, if it's policy development, it's not, you know, that understanding it is early, and we keep that confidential until it appears in the public domain for everybody. So yeah, so early on, and then again, it's ways that we can build in scrutiny as part and parcel of what we've done as well. So it's really good. So thank you. Item 12, right, Councillor Smith has had to leave them. His laptop is rebooting, which has kicked him out of the technological kick out. So I think it's Elizabeth and I. I'm not sure, have we had a corporate parenting board since the last panel meeting, Elizabeth? I'm not sure we have.
They always seem to be the week after.
Yeah. Fine.
So I think we're
No.
a little bit
Yeah.
behind, but I think the last one was
Yeah.
our next one's the 28th.
28, yeah, it's coming up, isn't it? So what I will do, and this is, I do remember, so at the Children's Ambition Board, Ophelia mentioned about, so some of the questions that have been asked at corporate parenting, I know by myself, it was about apprenticeships. And I'm a bit of an advocate for apprenticeships. I just think it's really good for any children or young person to get involved with that, just that life, building those skills for adult life. And Ophelia's at the Children's Ambition Board said there's going to be something coming up at the Corporate Parenting Board about, particularly for our children looked after, how we can investigate, whether certainly in post-16 stage, where apprenticeships will be more appropriate. I think there's 6 at the moment. 6 of our children, young people post-16 are doing that. Are there opportunities for that to be done more? And then parents I talked to about whether you want your young person, your child to be doing that. There's a bit of nervousness about it. So perhaps that's what we do at corporate parenting. We discuss whether it's the right do, and I'm sure for some of our children looked after, it's absolutely the right thing to do. Those skills you build up in the work environment. Not to say the financial benefits as well. If you can get on a good quality apprenticeship with the appropriate training as well, it makes such a massive difference. Okay. And again, there's some issues around, I know the questions that Jackie Ramsey, when she was off on the panel, I was asking about ethnicity and the relationship to looked after children looked after. I think James had been asking some of those as well. So there has been really good progress on that and understanding through corporate parenting. That's great. That's item 12. Item 13 is the Children's Scrutiny Work Programme. I think, Elizabeth, there was something you wanted to pick up on the visits around the MHST. Do you want to bring that up?
Yes, please. We had a really, really good visit to the with the primary school, but I'd really like to have a look, see what's going on in secondary as well, if that's possible, please. I think that would be, we'll see how chilled we can get in there as well. Well-being exercises. I think it would be lovely because secondary, as he's already mentioned, primary secondary transition is always a difficult point for children, and also as they leave secondary as well and go on to the next stage. I think that's always a flashpoint. So I think we need to keep an eye on that. But it would be really lovely to have a look at what work's being done there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, there's some really good work gone on over the years in our secondary, in the secondary phase, and I know some of us who've got a bit of secondary experience, and we used to do the Year 8 Citizenship Day. We used to do it up at Combe Valley, and that was about a couple hundred young people that we talked to, talking about the things, and then the Year 9 events that the school nurses used to sort out, and that was really good, and that was a really good way of engaging face to face with children and young people, being involved in that. And I think the point about post-16, it'd be really good to do some visits to our sixth form colleges and our post-16 colleges, and perhaps some of the other stuff as well, and that, to pick up what's happening in that environment as well. So I think some of us would be up for that, and if that could be arranged, and just to see how things are. That's part of that triangulation. Any other questions or comments on the work programme, panel members? Oh, Joanne, sorry, I see a hand. Is that a new hand?
It is, just to mention, not a report or a visit per se, but when you were mentioning transition, we are planning at the moment for the second Our Kirklees Futures event. That will be at the end of June. It's the 27th, and actually the theme will be absolutely about transition. really would like to extend that invitation to Scrutiny members to participate. So we'll make sure you have the details of the time and venue. Hope that's okay. Look forward to seeing you in June.
Yeah, that's great, Joanne. Yeah, just picking up on the visits, we've now visited all the child protection clusters for the whole of Kirklees, and some of them we've been visiting for a second time. It's just been a privilege to listen to our frontline staff and their experience, and them sharing just the openness of people as well. And it's been really useful to triangulate that as well, and we're hoping that will continue to be part of our work programme and the other visits as well. So. This is our last meeting of the municipal year. There will be opportunities to review the work programme, but I hope some of the key things we've picked up during this year and in previous years will continue. Again, we're still on that journey to outstanding, to being excellent. We know that issues around well-being are not going to go away, and we want to see that. And so there's just things that we're going to go on. So can I take this opportunity to express my thanks, particularly to all the panel members who've been involved. We've already said special thanks to Paul, but all the panel members. Yeah, can I thank all the officers that have presented during the year for your patience with us, with our questions, and your openness at all stages. That's really appreciated. Yeah, really warm welcome to you, Vicky, as you take over that role from your particular role from Elaine McShane, and hopefully you know we've sort of it's been you're smiling, so so some of our questions it's about getting the best out of everybody. That's what we want. So thank you. That's the way we try and do things. I want to particularly express thanks to Helen and Nicola for your support. And for our technical staff for persisting with hybrid meetings. I think that works well for most of us. I suppose the last thing, and this is the right thing to do, is to thank those parents and young people we've met during the year. At the primary school at Pecan has been great to do that. And I just want to start by thanking the children and young people. I never quite get the numbers right, Joanna, correct me. It's nearly 100,000 young people who live in Kirklees. They are, the vast majority of them, are just absolutely fantastic. And one of the small minority occasionally, things don't go as well. That's the honest thing, but the vast majority, they're just wonderful. They're brilliant. They share the same cares and concerns about what happens to them and the communities where they live as we do. And I think we all want to, do the best for them. And I think if we ask them, they'd want the best for our communities as well, and they make just a fantastic contribution. And some of that we get to see, whether it's through the Mrs Sunderland competition or Pennine Dance, or in our, the contributions they make through various things in our schools and communities. So that's great. So a big thank you to them. So thank you to everybody. Particular thanks to our children and young people and everybody who's doing their best for them. Council's annual general meeting is in May, and then we'll know who the new panel is, and there's likely to be another meeting in public in June. So watch this space. Take care. Bless you all. Bye.